A forgotten world of monumental art and epic sea voyages once thrived on the misty islands of Canada's Pacific coast. This is the story of the Haida people, an indigenous nation so formidable at sea they have been called Canada's Vikings. Their society produced towering totem poles and sprawling longhouses, built by master carvers who believed the forest itself was alive. You are about to embark on an epic adventure into one of the most misunderstood chapters of Native American history. By the end, you will understand how a culture of warriors and artists faced near annihilation and emerged with their identity stronger than ever. We will explore why entire villages fell silent and how their haunting beauty still speaks from the shore. What does it truly mean for a civilization to be unbreakable? Their world was an archipelago shrouded in mist, a place they knew as Haida, the islands of the people. For thousands of years, the Haida nation was not just living on this land. They were woven into its very fabric, from the depths of the kelp forests to the towering canopy of the rainforest. They were a people defined by the sea, building canoes from massive cedar trees that could carry dozens of warriors across open ocean. Their society was a complex tapestry of two main clans, the Eagle and the Raven, a system that governed everything from marriage to leadership. At the heart of their culture was the potlatch, a grand feast where status was earned not by hoarding wealth, but by giving it away in spectacular displays of generosity. The name Haida itself, given to them by neighboring nations, simply means the people, a testament to their formidable presence. And it is this mastery of the sea, their warrior spirit, and their far-reaching trade networks that have so often drawn comparisons to the Vikings of the Atlantic. They were the undisputed masters of their watery world, a civilization sculpted by wind, wood, and wave. These great cedar canoes were the longships of the Pacific, vessels capable of braving the open ocean for weeks at a time. Just as Norse shipwrights shaped oak into legendary dragon ships, Haida artisans transformed single, massive red cedars into seaworthy giants over 60 feet long. They were masterpieces of form and function, carved with symbolic crests and designed to slice through treacherous waves, carrying warriors, families, and trade goods across vast distances. This shared mastery of naval engineering gave both cultures a profound strategic advantage, turning the sea from a barrier into a highway. Their maritime skill forged a reputation that echoed along the entire coastline. The Haida were known as formidable raiders, striking settlements to acquire wealth, resources, and captives, their approach from the mist a thing of legend and fear. Yet to label them merely as warriors is to miss the full picture. They were also sophisticated traders, their networks stretching from modern-day Alaska down to Washington state, exchanging prized goods like copper, slaves, and the invaluable Eulachon oil, often called grease. This dual identity, as both fearsome raiders and shrewd merchants, mirrors the complex legacy of the Vikings themselves. Both societies held courage and exploration as their highest virtues, their worlds defined not by the land they owned, but by the horizons they dared to chase. This archipelago was far more than a home, it was a living entity. Haida rises from the Pacific like the spine of a submerged world, a chain of over 150 islands cloaked in perpetual mist. Dense, temperate rainforests of ancient cedar and Sitka spruce tower overhead, their branches draped in ghostly green moss. The air is thick with the scent of salt and damp earth, a constant reminder of the ocean's presence. These are the islands of the people, a land of dramatic, rain-soaked beauty that forged a civilization in its image. The rhythm of life here was dictated by the sea's bounty and the forest's generosity. From the ocean, the Haida harvested hallie, but the size of daws and salmon that choked the streams during their annual runs. From the immense cedars, they built not just their homes and canoes, but their entire material world, from intricate baskets to the very clothes on their backs. This profound connection to their environment is etched into their very origin stories. In their mythology, the trickster Raven found the first humans in a clamshell on a beach, coaxing them out to become the Haida people. Every cove, every mountain, and every ancient tree held a spirit, a story, making the land itself a sacred text. This deep spiritual relationship bred a unique resourcefulness and resilience. Living on the edge of the known world required an intimate understanding of nature's cycles and moods. They learned to read the weather in the clouds and the tides in the moon, their survival and their culture a direct reflection of this powerful, isolated place. Haida Gwaii was not just a backdrop for their history, it was the central character, the silent architect of their unbreakable spirit. But this mastery of the physical world was mirrored by an equally profound spiritual landscape. At the heart of Haida belief was a world alive with supernatural beings, where animals possessed human spirits and legendary figures walked the earth. The most vital of these was Raven, the great trickster, a being of endless appetite and cunning who was also a profound creator. In the time before time, the world was shrouded in darkness. It was Raven who, through deception and guile, stole the sun from a great chief who kept it hidden in a box, releasing its brilliant light into the sky for all people. This single act defines his dual nature, neither purely good nor evil, but a necessary force of change and creation. Alongside Raven existed the Transformers, powerful supernatural beings who traveled the world, turning the ancient, often misguided inhabitants into the stones, islands, and animals that define Haida Gwaii today. They literally sculpted the landscape, turning myth into geography and imbuing every mountain and stream with a sacred story. This spiritual reality was woven directly into the social fabric through the moiety system. Every Haida person belonged to one of two clans, either the Eagle or the Raven. You were born into your mother's clan, and this identity was your spiritual and social compass. It dictated who you could marry, as you must choose a partner from the opposite clan, ensuring balance. It determined the magnificent crests carved on totem poles and painted on house fronts, each symbol a declaration of lineage and a connection to a specific supernatural encounter from the deep past. This was not merely a social rule, it was a cosmic order, a way of organizing the entire universe into a relationship of reciprocal halves. The eagle and the raven were forever linked, their interplay the very engine of life, ceremony, and identity. Rising from the forest floor like the very bones of the earth, these monumental carvings are far more than mere art. A Haida totem pole is a story carved in cedar, a heraldic pillar declaring the lineage, history, and spiritual rights of a family. They were never objects of worship, not idols to be prayed to, but rather a towering form of public record. Each pole tells a specific story, commemorates a great potlatch, honors the dead, or marks the legendary encounter an ancestor had with a supernatural being. The process of its creation was a sacred undertaking. A master carver and his apprentices would first select a single, massive red cedar, a tree that might have stood for nearly 1,000 years. After a ceremony of gratitude, the tree was felled, often with great precision to control its immense fall, and then the long work of transformation began. Using hand tools like adzes and carving knives, the artists would slowly reveal the figures trapped within the wood, a process that could take an entire year. The symbols that emerged were a language understood by all. A bear might symbolize strength and motherhood, its claws and wide mouth unmistakable. A frog, with its bulging eyes, often represented a link between worlds, as it could live both in water and on land. The killer whale, or sea wolf, was a symbol of power and dignity, its dorsal fin a dramatic crown. An eagle spoke of authority and a connection to the skies, while the raven, of course, embodied the trickster's creative and chaotic spirit. These figures were stacked in a deliberate narrative order, a family's crests and legends made visible for generations. The raising of the pole was itself a monumental event, a community endeavor that required the strength of many people, pulled upright with ropes and leverage, accompanied by singing, dancing, and feasting. It was a public declaration, a permanent part of the village's living landscape. These poles were the history books of a people without written text, their stories standing tall against the coastal rains, ensuring that the memory of a chief, a feast, or a mythical event would never be forgotten. Within the great longhouses, under the watchful eyes of the totem poles, a different kind of monument was built, one not of wood but of pure social power. This was the potlatch, a ceremonial feast so central to life that to understand it is to understand the Haida soul. Far more than a simple party, a potlatch was a grand multi-day spectacle where a chief and his clan displayed their standing, not by what they kept but by what they gave away. Imagine a gathering where the host, to mark a new totem pole or to pass on a chief's name, would pile high mountains of blankets, food, and even canoes, only to distribute every last item to his guests. The more extravagant the gifts, the greater the prestige and honor bestowed upon the host. It was a radical economy of generosity, where wealth was not stored but circulated, solidifying alliances and affirming the entire social hierarchy. This system was the engine of their society, a living institution that functioned as a combination of a supreme court, a national bank, and a historical archive. Disputes were settled, legal claims were validated, and the stories and songs performed were the legal deeds to territories and crests. The entire community witnessed these transactions, making the potlatch the ultimate binding force of law and memory. Yet this profound expression of Haida identity became a target for colonial authorities. Seeing the potlatch as a wasteful, barbaric, and anti-Christian practice that hindered assimilation, the Canadian government enacted a brutal law in 1884, making the ceremony illegal. The ban was an act of cultural warfare, a direct attack on the very heart of Haida governance and social cohesion. For decades, the great feasts were forced underground, held in secret at great risk, with sentries posted to watch for the Indian agent. The attempt to extinguish the potlatch was an attempt to break the people, to sever the threads of memory, status, and law that held their world together. How does a civilization survive when its most vital ritual is declared a crime? Behind the monumental poles was a world of intimate artistry where master carvers worked on a human scale. These artisans transformed cedar, argillite, and even horn into objects of breathtaking complexity. They carved dynamic masks for ceremony and dance, their features capable of shifting to reveal a second, hidden face. They hollowed massive cedar logs into ornate storage chests and sculpted shallow feast dishes in the forms of animals, each piece polished to a deep luster. The value of these objects was incalculable, serving as the physical currency of status and history exchanged during potlatches. But the artistic genius was not confined to carving alone. In the hands of Haida weavers, the inner bark of the cedar tree and the wool of the mountain goat became textiles of astonishing beauty. They crafted baskets so tightly woven they were naturally waterproof, capable of holding water or boiling soups directly over a fire. The patterns, often depicting stylized animals from clan crests, were woven directly into the fabric of the basket itself, a testament to a weaver's supreme skill and spiritual concentration. Their most prestigious textile was the chilkat robe, a ceremonial dancing blanket that represented the peak of this weaving tradition. Using a complex finger weaving technique without a loom, they created elaborate, symmetrical designs featuring crest figures like the killer whale and the beaver, fringed with long, swinging tassels. When a dancer moved, the entire robe came alive, a swirling, dynamic canvas of form and line. To early European explorers and traders, these objects were not simple curiosities. They were evidence of a sophisticated artistic tradition that rivaled their own. They encountered a level of technical and artistic mastery they had not expected, a civilization where every utilitarian object, from a simple spoon to a chief's robe, was also a profound work of art. This was a society where beauty was not a luxury but a fundamental dimension of daily life. These great ocean canoes were the very heart of Haida power. To construct a single vessel was a monumental undertaking that began with a ceremonial search through the ancient rainforest. Master canoe builders sought out the perfect western red cedar, a tree that was not merely tall but straight-grained and free of knots, a living pillar that might become a seagoing giant. The selection itself was a spiritual act, a request to the forest for a partner in their voyages. Once found, the tree was carefully felled, often using a combination of controlled fire and stone adzes, a slow and deliberate process of persuading the giant to the earth. The real magic, the true transformation, happened next. Using tools made of stone, bone, and later iron, the builders would begin to hollow the massive log. They employed a brilliant technique of using carefully placed fires to char the interior wood, which they then scraped away with adzes. This fire and scrape method allowed them to shape the hull with incredible precision, creating a vessel that was both strong and surprisingly lightweight. The final form was a masterpiece of hydrodynamics with a raised bow and stern designed to cut through the fierce swells of the open Pacific. These were not simple dugouts for calm rivers. They were deep sea craft, some stretching over 60 feet long and capable of carrying 40 warriors, a full trade delegation, or an entire family with all their possessions. Their scale was a direct reflection of their purpose, to conquer not the land but the sea itself. This mastery of naval architecture opened up a world of possibilities, turning the vast, intimidating expanse of the Pacific into a familiar highway. The Haida navigated by a deep, accumulated knowledge of the stars, the currents, the flight patterns of birds, and the very feel of the swells beneath the hull. They could undertake voyages lasting weeks, traveling hundreds of miles from Haida Gwaii down the coast to what is now Washington State, or north to the territories of the Tlingit and Tsimshian peoples. These journeys were the lifeblood of their civilization. In times of peace, the canoes were laden with valuable trade goods, the hulls filled with stacks of prized Eulachon oil, finely woven baskets, and intricately carved copper shields. They returned with goods unavailable on their islands, cementing economic alliances and bringing wealth back to their villages. In times of conflict, the same vessels became weapons of war, their sleek profiles appearing suddenly from the coastal mist, carrying parties of armored warriors. The canoe was therefore the ultimate symbol of Haida identity, a single object that embodied their artistic skill, their environmental wisdom, their economic ambition, and their formidable reputation. It was a floating piece of their homeland, carrying the spirit of the cedar forest across the trackless ocean. The sleek cedar canoes that had for centuries carried warriors and traders now approached a new kind of vessel on the horizon. The first European ships arrived in the late 1700s, floating islands of wood and sail that sparked both awe and strategic calculation. For the Haida, these initial encounters were not a submission to a superior force, but a new chapter in their long history of maritime engagement. They met Russian, Spanish, British, and American explorers with a confident curiosity, quickly establishing themselves as shrewd and formidable trading partners. The currency of this new relationship was the sea otter pelt, a luxuriously dense fur that was worthless in Haida society, but represented unimaginable wealth in the global markets of China and Europe. The Haida controlled the richest hunting grounds and were masterful hunters, placing them in a position of tremendous power. They dictated the terms of trade, demanding iron, cloth, and firearms in exchange for the pelts. For a brief, pivotal period, this exchange brought unprecedented material wealth to Haida villages, enriching chiefs and elevating the scale of potlatches to new heights. But this new prosperity carried a hidden, terrible cost. The same ships that brought trade goods also carried invisible passengers. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, to which indigenous peoples had no immunity, began to ravage the communities. These were not just illnesses, they were biological wildfires that swept through villages with horrifying speed. Imagine a community where the knowledge of master carvers, the songs of lineage, and the strength of entire families were erased in a single season. The social fabric, woven so carefully over generations, began to tear. At the same time, the very weapons the Haida acquired through trade, the muskets and metal blades, began to intensify conflicts, turning traditional rivalries into deadlier affairs. This was the cruel paradox of first contact. The Haida stood as powerful equals in the negotiation for furs, yet they were unknowingly trading for the tools of their own devastation. How does a civilization navigate a relationship that offers both immense power and existential threat? The balance of their world was shifting, and the waves of change were only beginning to build. The wealth and power acquired through the fur trade proved to be a devastating illusion. By the mid-19th century, a series of smallpox epidemics swept across Haida with the force of a tsunami. This was not a typical illness, it was a plague against which the people had no natural defense, a biological firestorm that consumed everything in its path. The disease ravaged the body with high fever and a horrific pustular rash, and it ravaged the community with even greater cruelty. Entire families were wiped out within days. The social order, so carefully maintained through the potlatch and clan lineages, collapsed into chaos and despair. Villages that had echoed with the sounds of carving and celebration fell into an eerie, permanent silence. The scale of the loss is almost impossible to comprehend. Historians estimate that up to 90% of the Haida population perished. Imagine a community of 1,000 people reduced to 100. This was not a gradual decline, it was a near-total annihilation in a single generation. The most profound loss was of the elders and the knowledge keepers. With them died the specific songs for certain ceremonies, the intricate stories behind family crests, the nuanced techniques for navigating by the winter stars, and the oral histories that stretched back for millennia. A master carver might take his unique style to the grave without an apprentice to carry it on. A weaver might be the last to know a particular pattern that had been in her family for centuries. This was more than a demographic catastrophe. It was a library of human knowledge and spirit being burned to the ground. One by one, the great villages were abandoned. Places like Nestled on the southern end of the islands, once a bustling hub of maritime power, became a ghost town, its magnificent totem poles left to stand as silent sentinels over empty longhouses. The survivors, shattered and few in number, were forced to consolidate, leaving behind the bones of their ancestors and the physical anchors of their history. The world the Haida had known for thousands of years had effectively ended. The great cedar canoes now rested on silent shores, and the rhythm of the potlatch was broken. In the face of such absolute devastation, how does a culture find the will to continue? The answer would lie in the stubborn, quiet resilience of those who remained. A ghost town stands on the edge of the world. On the small island of Sgangwi, the wind whispers through the ruins of a place once known as Nestled. Here, the forest and the sea are slowly reclaiming a village that was abandoned to time and tragedy. Moss blankets the collapsed beams of great longhouses. Dozens of towering mortuary poles and crest poles still stand in a solemn row along the shore, their carved faces gazing eternally out to sea. The figures are weathered, their features softened by over a century of rain and salt air, yet their power is undeniable. A bear, a killer whale, an eagle, their forms still distinct, stand as guardians of a world that vanished. This is not a place that was destroyed, but one that was surrendered. Walking among these silent sentinels is like reading the last page of a magnificent history book, a page left open to the elements. The poles themselves are a final, frozen potlatch, a last declaration of lineage and pride from the chiefs and families who once thrived here. They tell us of a society rich with artists and orators, of a people so confident in their place in the universe that they carved their stories into the very landscape. The loss embodied by this place is not an abstraction. It is the quiet that hangs where the sound of adzes carving cedar should be. It is the empty space where the fires of the longhouse should glow. The village of Ninstance was once home to hundreds, a vibrant center of maritime power and artistic genius. Today, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized for its profound cultural value, a monument to both the brilliance of Haida civilization and the depth of the catastrophe that befell it. These poles are the last witnesses. They saw the wealth of the fur trade arrive, and they saw the smallpox that followed. They saw the population fall from over 300 to a handful of survivors who finally left their ancestral home behind in the late 19th century. What secrets do these carvings hold that we can no longer hear? Their silence speaks of a beauty that was almost lost forever, and a resilience that was only waiting for its time to return. Yet the story of the Haida does not end with the silent villages. A powerful and persistent colonial myth took root during this time of devastation, the myth of the vanishing Indian. It was a convenient narrative that suggested indigenous peoples were a relic of the past, destined to fade away and be replaced by a more civilized world. But the Haida people were not vanishing. They were gathering their strength in the quiet spaces. In the face of the potlatch ban and the forced assimilation of residential schools, they made a conscious, collective decision to become guardians of their own culture. The great public ceremonies went underground, held in secret with lookouts posted to warn of the authorities. More importantly, the knowledge was internalized. Elders whispered the old stories to children in the safety of their homes. The complex rhythms of the Haida language were spoken behind closed doors. Master artists continued to carve, passing down the sacred proportions and symbolic meanings to a new generation, ensuring the lineage of their craft would not be broken. They were preserving a flame, protecting the embers of their identity from a storm meant to extinguish it forever. This was not a passive survival, but an active, defiant act of cultural memory. How does a civilization endure when its public expressions are outlawed? It turns inward, fortifying the heart of its being, the family and the private space, where the true spirit of the people remains ungovernable. The poles may have been weathering on the shore, but the stories they told were being carefully safeguarded in the minds and hearts of the people, waiting for the day they could stand in the open once more. From the quiet vigilance of those hidden years, a new sound began to emerge, the steady, confident tap of an adze on wood. The mid-20th century marked the beginning of a profound cultural renaissance, a reawakening led not by politicians or warriors but by artists. These visionaries reached back through time, drawing on the old forms and symbols to forge a new path forward. At the forefront of this movement was Bill Reid, a man of mixed Haida and European heritage who rediscovered his ancestral legacy as a young man. He immersed himself in the old museum collections, studying the masterpieces held in dusty drawers, and apprenticed with the few elders who still held the knowledge. Reid did not simply copy the old styles, he breathed new life into them, blending traditional Haida design with a modern sensibility that captivated the world. His monumental sculpture, The Raven and the First Men, depicts the great trickster coaxing humanity from a clamshell, a moment of pure creation carved from a massive block of laminated yellow cedar. The piece became an instant icon, housed at the University of British Columbia Museum of Anthropology, announcing to the world that Haida art and storytelling were not relics of the past but a living, vibrant force. He followed this with the spirit of Haida Gwaii, a breathtaking bronze canoe overflowing with a crew of mythical beings from Haida cosmology. The raven and the frog, the bear mother and the mouse woman, all journeying together in a vessel that represents the entire nation. This magnificent work, cast in 2 versions, now stands at the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C., and the Vancouver International Airport, a permanent ambassador of Haida worldview. Reid's success did something extraordinary. It ignited a powerful sense of pride and identity among the Haida people themselves. He demonstrated that their artistic heritage was a source of immense strength and global admiration. He was not alone in this revival. Artists like Robert Davidson, a Haida carver from a young age, emerged as a powerful voice, creating stunning new totem poles and paintings that reconnected his community with its ceremonial roots. This renaissance was about more than creating beautiful objects. It was about rebuilding a nation. The art became a vessel for cultural knowledge, a way to teach the younger generation their language, their stories, and their rightful place in the world. It was a declaration that the people of the cedar and the canoe were still here, still creating, and still speaking to the world with a voice that could no longer be silenced. That artistic renaissance was the first step in a much larger reclamation of power. The Haida people were not just reviving their art, they were rebuilding their nation, transforming from survivors into modern warriors of diplomacy and law. This new chapter of defiance began in the 1980s on the shores of Lyell Island, known to the Haida as Athlei Gwai. The ancient cedars there, some as old as 1,000 years, were being clear-cut by logging companies at an alarming rate. For the Haida, this was not merely an environmental issue, it was a spiritual crisis. Each fallen tree represented a piece of their history, a potential canoe or totem pole, a living library of their culture being erased. The elders, remembering the silent villages left behind by disease, declared enough. They would not allow their land to be emptied a second time. In a series of powerful, non-violent blockades, Haida men, women, and elders stood on the muddy logging roads, facing down heavy machinery and RCMP officers. They carried hand-carved staffs and wore traditional button blankets, their presence a peaceful but unyielding wall of resolve. The images of elderly Haida women, their faces etched with determination, being arrested on their own ancestral land, shocked the conscience of Canada and made national headlines. This was not a protest, it was an assertion of sovereignty, a declaration that Haida Gwai was not crown land to be sold, but a homeland to be protected. The stand on Lyell Island became a turning point. The sustained pressure and moral force of their campaign forced the governments of Canada and British Columbia to the negotiating table. The result was a landmark agreement, the creation of the Gwai Honas National Park Reserve and Haida Heritage Site. This was a revolutionary co-management model where the Haida Nation and the Canadian government share responsibility for protecting this magnificent archipelago. It proved that Indigenous leadership was not just vital but essential to the future of the land. This hard-won victory fueled a broader political awakening. The Haida have since passed their own constitution, affirming their inherent right to self-government. They are actively revitalizing their language, with immersion schools ensuring a new generation can speak the words of their ancestors. They manage their fisheries with a focus on sustainability that honors ancient practices. Their journey demonstrates that sovereignty is not a single event, but a continuous process of stewardship, negotiation, and cultural strength. The same spirit that once launched great war canoes now navigates the complex currents of modern politics, always guided by the principle that the land and the people are one. The carvings and the canoes tell one part of the story, but the true soul of the Haida world lies in its words. The Haida language is not one, but two distinct and ancient dialects, Xod-Kil in the north and Xoida-Kil in the south. These are not simply different sets of words for the same things, they are entire structures of thought, each holding a unique key to understanding the Haida relationship with the universe. The language is deeply relational, built around how things are connected rather than just what they are. It has a complex system of what linguists call classifiers, special words that categorize every noun. You do not just say a canoe, you use a specific classifier that identifies it as a long, rigid object. You do not just say a stone, you use a classifier for a compact, roundish object. This grammatical structure forces a speaker to constantly acknowledge the inherent nature and shape of everything around them, reinforcing a worldview where every rock, tree, and animal has its own distinct spirit and place in the cosmos. The language is the vessel for their entire philosophical and legal system. The concepts of balance between the eagle and raven moieties, the protocols of the potlatch, the intricate stories of the transformers, all of these ideas find their most precise and nuanced expression in the original tongue. A story told in English is a translation, but a story told in Xod Kill is an experience, a direct connection to the consciousness of the ancestors. For a time, that connection was perilously close to being severed. The trauma of residential schools where children were punished for speaking their mother tongue, combined with the dominance of English, pushed the language to the brink of silence. By the late 20th century, only a handful of fluent elders remained, each one a living library on the verge of closing forever. The loss of a language is not just the loss of words, it is the loss of a unique way of seeing, a universe of knowledge that simply vanishes when the last speaker is gone. How do you rebuild a universe from a whisper? The answer began with the elders themselves, who refused to let their words be the last. Community-led initiatives sprang up, treating language revitalization with the same urgency as a rescue mission. They created immersion preschools where the youngest children are now surrounded by the sounds of Haida Kill, learning their colors and numbers from fluent speakers. In dedicated language nests, grandparent-aged mentors spend their days speaking only Haida to small groups, recreating the natural language environment of an old-time home. For adults, intensive master-apprentice programs pair a learner with a fluent elder for hundreds of hours of conversational practice, a direct and sacred transfer of knowledge. Technology has become a powerful ally in this fight, with teams of linguists and speakers working together to create comprehensive digital dictionaries, recorded story archives, and online learning modules. These tools ensure that the precise pronunciation of a word, the lilt of a forgotten song, or the cadence of an ancient story can be preserved and accessed by anyone, anywhere, forever. This is more than an academic exercise, it is an act of cultural survival. When a child learns to introduce themselves in Xod Kill, they are not just learning vocabulary, they are reclaiming an identity. They are learning to think as their ancestors thought, to see the world as a web of relationships, and to carry the old stories forward on their own tongues. The language is the final, unbreakable thread connecting the great poles of the past to the vibrant promise of the future. His hands shape the twilight of one world and the dawn of another. At a time when his people were facing catastrophic decline, the master artist Charles Edenshaw was born around 1839, and his life's work became a profound act of cultural preservation. He was a sculptor, a painter, and a silversmith, a man whose unparalleled skill made him a legend even among his own people. He worked primarily in a unique material called argillite, a soft, black shale found only in a single quarry on Haida. Before European contact, argillite was used for practical items, but in Edenshaw's time, it transformed into the medium for some of the most sophisticated and complex artworks ever produced by Haida hands. He carved elaborate platters, tall model totem poles, and intricate puzzle boxes, each piece dense with the figures of his ancestral stories. What set his work apart was its breathtaking precision and flawless finish. The surfaces of his carvings are so smooth they feel like polished stone, the lines so crisp and deep they seem to have been drawn with ink. He possessed an intuitive understanding of balance and form, packing a narrative of eagles, ravens, bears, and frogs into a single, harmonious composition that feels both ancient and startlingly modern. But his genius was not confined to tradition alone. He was a brilliant innovator, adapting his art to meet the demands of a new market. European and American collectors, sailors, and anthropologists were eager for souvenirs, for artifacts of what they wrongly called a dying race. Edenshaw gave them artifacts, but he infused every piece with the full intellectual and spiritual weight of Haida cosmology. He was not simply copying old forms, he was codifying them, creating a definitive visual encyclopedia of his people's crests and legends for an outside world that did not understand them. A fine example is his famous argillite platter depicting the story of Raven stealing the light. The composition is a masterclass in storytelling. The central figure of Raven is bold and dynamic, his wings outstretched, while the smaller figures of the beings he tricked are woven seamlessly into the background. Every element, from the curve of a beak to the placement of a joint, is deliberate and meaningful, a complete narrative captured in shimmering black stone. He applied this same mastery to new materials, becoming one of the first Haida silversmiths. He engraved bracelets and rings with the same crest figures he carved in argillite, adorning the bodies of his people with their own heritage in a precious new form of metal. Charles Edenshaw was more than an artist, he was a bridge. His work traveled across the ocean into museum collections, carrying the soul of Haida Gwaii to the world. While at home, he ensured that the stories, the lineages, and the very essence of his culture were not forgotten, but were instead rendered in forms of such beauty and authority that they demanded to be remembered. His legacy is a testament to the power of art to defy erasure, to hold a line against the tide of history with nothing but a carving knife and an unbreakable will. These trade routes were the lifeblood of the Pacific Northwest, a maritime Silk Road built on prestige and practicality. The Haida were not merely participants in this system, they were its master architects, leveraging their geographic position and unmatched craftsmanship to become central economic players. Their great canoes were not just vessels of war, but the 18-wheelers of their day, carrying immense wealth across hundreds of miles of open ocean. From their islands, they exported goods that were coveted up and down the coast. A Haida canoe was the ultimate status symbol and a technological marvel, highly sought after by mainland chiefs. Their master carvers also produced magnificent shields from raw copper, a metal that was rare, malleable, and believed to hold supernatural power. These gleaming, engraved plates were a form of ultimate currency, their value increasing with each potlatch they were displayed in. Perhaps their most unique export was Eulachon oil, rendered from a small, oily fish known as the candlefish. This rich, nutritious grease was a staple for coastal peoples, used for cooking, food preservation, and as a condiment. It was so prized that well-established trade paths into the interior became known as grease trails, a testament to its economic pull. In return, the Haida acquired goods that defined their own wealth and status. From the south, they traded for dentalia, the tusk-shaped shells harvested from the waters off Vancouver Island. These shells were strung into strands that functioned as a standardized form of money, their value determined by their length and uniformity. From the interior, through complex trade relationships with other nations, they obtained obsidian, the volcanic glass that could be knapped into razor-sharp blades and cutting tools. This intricate web of exchange meant that a Haida chief's wealth was measured not just in local resources, but in a cosmopolitan collection of treasures. A single potlatch might display copper from the north, dentalia from the south, and obsidian from the eastern mountains, all brought home by Haida canoes. This economic dominance ensured their influence was felt far beyond their own shores, making them indispensable to the entire regional economy. How far would a society travel to secure its place at the very center of the world? Every forest stream and coastal rock face held a consciousness of its own. For the Haida, the universe was not a collection of inert resources, but a society of beings, each with its own spirit and personhood. A bear was not just an animal you might hunt, it was a creature with its own family, its own home in the woods, and its own powerful spirit. The salmon that returned each year were not merely fish, they were conscious guests offering their bodies to sustain the people, expecting respect in return. This belief in a fully animate world created a profound spiritual contract between the Haida and their environment. To secure a personal connection to this power, individuals, often on the cusp of adulthood, would undertake a vision quest. They would travel to a remote, powerful place, a lonely stretch of beach, a mountain lake, or a deep cave, to fast and pray alone for days, In this vulnerable state, stripped of human comforts, they sought an encounter with a supernatural being. This could be the spirit of wolf, granting endurance and hunting prowess, or the spirit of octopus, offering dexterity and cunning. This spirit would become a lifelong guardian and source of strength, a personal link to the vast, invisible web of power that animated the world. This entire worldview was bound together by a single, guiding principle, a word that resonates through Haida life to this day, Yogudang. It means respect, but that English translation feels too small. Yogudang is an active, relational responsibility. It is the respect you show to a towering cedar before you ask it to become your canoe, acknowledging its life and spirit. It is the respect you show to a hale, but by returning its bones to the sea, ensuring its spirit can return and be reborn. It is the respect you show to a river by not polluting it, because the river is a living entity, not a convenience. This principle of Yogudang directly shaped their most practical decisions. Their resource management was a form of spiritual ecology. They practiced rotational harvesting, moving between different fishing and hunting grounds to allow areas to recover, because exhausting a place showed deep disrespect to the spirits that lived there. They used every part of the animals they hunted, from the flesh of the seal to its sinew and bones, because waste was an insult to the being that had given its life. This was not a conservation strategy born from scarcity, but from abundance, a belief that the world would provide generously if it was treated with reverence. Their environmental ethics were not a separate set of rules. They were the natural outcome of a cosmology that saw no division between the person praying and the mountain being prayed to. How would you treat the forest if you believed the trees were your relatives? How would you fish the seas if you knew the salmon were willing partners in your survival? For the Haida, the answer was woven into the very fabric of their existence, a daily practice of living reciprocity with a world they knew was alive, watching, and worthy of honor. The same hands that carved breathtaking art were also skilled in the craft of war. Haida villages were not just communities, they were fortresses, strategically positioned for defense and dominance. They were often built on small offshore islands or rocky promontories, accessible only by water, turning the sea into a natural moat. Approaching these settlements from a canoe, a visitor would first see a formidable wall of tall, wooden palisades rising from the shoreline. These were not simple fences, but robust log walls, sometimes made from entire tree trunks lashed together, designed to repel attackers and provide cover for defenders. The village location was a deliberate statement of power, a declaration that its inhabitants were secure enough to command the sea lanes and brave enough to live on its edge. Within these fortified communities, the Haida developed a sophisticated martial tradition. Their warriors went into battle protected by armor that was both functional and symbolic. They wore wooden slat armor constructed from narrow laths of cedar bound tightly together with sinew, creating a flexible yet resilient cuirass for the torso. Underneath this wooden shell, they often wore a thick tunic of hardened elk hide, adding another layer of protection against arrows and clubs. This combination of materials was remarkably effective, able to deflect or absorb the impact of most contemporary weapons. Their primary offensive tool was a powerful longbow, crafted from resilient yew wood, capable of launching arrows with enough force to pierce hide armor at a considerable distance. But their true battlefield was the water. Haida naval tactics were the stuff of legend. They would use the coastal fog and the maze of islands for ambush, their sleek canoes emerging from the mist in coordinated formations. A common tactic involved encircling an enemy canoe, using the superior speed and maneuverability of their own vessels to close the distance quickly. Once alongside, warriors would attempt to board, engaging in close-quarters combat with heavy clubs made of whalebone and daggers of sharpened bone or later iron. Their reputation was a strategic asset in itself. The knowledge that a Haida war party could appear at any moment from any direction created a powerful deterrent along the coast. This martial prowess was not an opposing force to their artistic spirit, but another facet of the same cultural diamond. It was the strength required to protect the wealth displayed in a potlatch, to defend the lineages carved into a totem pole, and to ensure that the songs of their ancestors would continue to echo from within the longhouse walls. Their fortresses stood not in fear, but in absolute confidence, a clear message to any who might challenge their sovereignty on land or sea. The formidable palisades and warrior canoes were only one side of the Haida world. While men were often the public face of power, the very foundation of that power flowed through the women. At the heart of Haida society was a matrilineal system that shaped everything from identity to inheritance. A child's place in the world was determined entirely by their mother. If your mother was an eagle, you were an eagle. If she was a raven, you were a raven. This meant that a person's social standing, their right to use certain crests on totem poles, and their claim to ancestral territories all came from their mother's line. A chief's own children did not inherit his eagle or raven status from him, they received it from their mother. This system placed women at the absolute center of cultural continuity. They were the living vessels of lineage, the keepers of the bloodline that connected a family to its mythical past. A high-ranking woman, therefore, was a figure of immense influence. She was often the one who held the authoritative knowledge of her family's histories and songs, the very legal deeds to their power. In the grand orchestration of a potlatch, her role was pivotal. While a chief might be the public host, it was often the women of his matriline, his sisters, his mother, his maternal aunts, who managed the vast quantities of wealth to be distributed. They decided the precise value of the blankets, the canoes, and the copper shields, and they oversaw the intricate protocols of the gift-giving. A miscalculation in this process could bring shame, but a masterful display, guided by a woman's strategic mind, could elevate her entire clan's status for generations. Their power was woven directly into the fabric of daily life, quite literally. The art of weaving was a sacred and highly prestigious skill, the exclusive domain of women. Using strips of cedar bark and the wool of mountain goats, they created objects of both sublime beauty and vital utility. A finely woven basket was not just a container, it was a measure of a woman's technical mastery and spiritual concentration. The most complex patterns, often depicting stylized crest animals, were woven directly into the basket's structure without a single stray thread. These baskets were so tightly made they could hold water or even be used to boil soup by dropping heated stones into the contents. The famed Chilkat dancing robes, with their long, swinging fringes and elaborate symmetrical designs, represented the absolute peak of this textile art. When a dancer moved in a potlatch, the robe swirled and came alive, a direct and vibrant display of the weaver's power and the clan's prestige. Through these essential roles, as the anchors of lineage, the strategists of status, and the creators of a unique artistic legacy, Haida women were the true weavers of their society. They held the threads of history, law, and economy in their hands, ensuring the pattern of their world remained unbroken. This spiritual contract with the land faced a systematic and brutal assault. Just as the epidemics subsided, a new wave of outsiders arrived with Bibles and a singular, devastating goal: to erase the Haida soul and replace it with a European one. Christian missionaries, both Catholic and Protestant, established themselves on Haida Gwaii, viewing the people's ancient beliefs not as a different way of seeing the world, but as pagan devilry that had to be uprooted. They condemned the potlatch as a heathen spectacle, they scorned the totem poles as idols, and they preached that the Haida language was unfit for prayer or civilization. Their presence alone was a cultural earthquake, but their most powerful tool was the residential school system. The Canadian government, in partnership with these churches, created a network of institutions designed to forcibly assimilate Indigenous children. The infamous phrase that guided this policy was to kill the Indian in the child. Imagine a child, perhaps only 5 or 6 years old, being taken from their family, often by force. They were loaded onto boats and sent far from home to places like the Coqualitza Institute or the Port Albany Residential School. Upon arrival, their hair, a sacred source of strength in many indigenous cultures, was shorn off. Their traditional clothes were taken and burned. They were forbidden under threat of severe punishment from speaking a single word of Xod Kill. If they whispered the name of their mother or tried to sing a song from a potlatch, they faced beatings, humiliation, or solitary confinement. These schools were not places of education, they were factories of forgetting. The children were taught that their parents were savages, their ancestors were fools, and their entire heritage was a sin. They were trained for manual labor, not for leadership, in a deliberate effort to break their spirit and slot them into the lowest rungs of a society that despised them. The trauma inflicted was not just physical, it was a profound psychological violence aimed at the very core of their identity. A generation of children grew up disconnected from their families, their language, and their land, carrying a deep, internalized shame for who they were. This was not an unfortunate side effect of history, it was a deliberate policy of cultural genocide. The legacy of these schools is a wound that has been passed down through generations, a ripple of pain affecting families and communities to this day. The journey back from this abyss has been long and painful. It began with the brave survivors speaking their truth, breaking the silence that had protected their abusers for decades. The process of reconciliation is not a single event, but an ongoing and difficult path of healing. It involves returning to the language, reviving the ceremonies, and most painfully, listening to the stories of the elders who endured those schools. It is a testament to the unbreakable Haida spirit that from this dark chapter, a new determination has arisen, a commitment to ensure that such an attack on their children and their culture can never, ever happen again. That legacy of artistry, once kept alive in whispers, now speaks in a brilliant chorus of modern voices. The carvings of Charles Edenshaw were not an ending, but a foundation upon which a new generation is building a breathtaking future. Contemporary Haida art is a living, breathing force, honoring ancestral forms while boldly stepping into global conversations and new mediums. Artists like Robert Davidson emerged in the 1960s, a pivotal figure in the cultural renaissance. He did something revolutionary. He carved and raised the first totem pole in his home community of Masset in nearly a century. That single act was more than art. It was a reawakening, a physical declaration that the people were still here and their stories would stand tall once more. Davidson's work is renowned for its crisp, clean lines and profound spiritual depth, drawing directly from the old rules of formline design, yet possessing a modern clarity that feels both ancient and utterly new. He is not a replicator, but an innovator, exploring new scales and contexts, from intricate gold jewelry to monumental public sculptures that anchor the identities of major cities. Alongside him, artists like Jim Hart, also known as Seven Idan Sioux, carry the torch with immense power. As a hereditary chief, Hart's art is intrinsically linked to his responsibility to his people. His massive bronze sculptures and intricately detailed argillite carvings do not just depict crests, they embody them, telling the specific histories of his family and the Haida nation. One of his most ambitious projects involves recreating a sacred whaling shrine, a concept lost to time which he is piecing together through historical records, spiritual guidance, and pure artistic vision. This is not mere reconstruction, it is a profound act of cultural repatriation through art, bringing something back from the brink of oblivion. But the evolution does not stop with wood and stone. Today's Haida artists are masterful painters, graphic designers, and digital animators. They take the classic ovoids and new forms of formline design and animate them, projecting swirling ravens and transforming bears onto gallery walls. They design stunning graphics for apparel, embedding their heritage into the fabric of contemporary life. Their subject matter has expanded too. While they continue to depict the timeless tales of Raven and Bear Mother, they also create powerful commentary on modern issues, from environmental protection to indigenous rights. A screen print might juxtapose a traditional killer whale crest with imagery of ocean pollution, a silent but potent call to action. A digital painting might weave together figures from Haida mythology with symbols of the residential school experience, creating a visual language for processing intergenerational trauma and celebrating resilience. This is how a tradition remains vital. It must be allowed to breathe, to grow, and to speak to the world as it is now. The argillite dust from Edenshaw's workshop has settled on computer keyboards, and the same stories that were once told in cedar are now being coded into light, ensuring they will journey forward for generations yet to come. This principle of living reciprocity finds its ultimate expression in a single, profound phrase, Gino Wadluxon Gud ad Kawas. It means everything depends on everything else. This is not a poetic slogan, but the foundational law of Haida existence, a truth that guided their ancestors and now fuels their role as global leaders in conservation. For the Haida, the clear-cut logging of the 1980s was not just an environmental problem. It was a violation of this sacred law, an attack on the relationships that hold the world together. Their modern stewardship is a direct extension of their ancient worldview, a conscious application of yogudang or respect on a grand scale. You can see this in their management of the fisheries. While industrial fleets often engage in overfishing, the Haida Nation has implemented strict, science-based quotas and closed certain areas to protect spawning grounds. They do this not merely for sustainable harvest, but because they see themselves in a covenant with the salmon people, honoring the generations of fish that have sustained their own generations. They understand that the health of the salmon runs is inextricably linked to the health of the forest streams, which is linked to the towering cedars that shade the water and prevent erosion. Everything is connected. This holistic approach has positioned them at the forefront of a global movement, indigenous-led conservation. The success of the Guayhanas Agreement proved a powerful model, one where indigenous knowledge and Western science are not in competition but in partnership. The Haida watch over their territories with a combination of satellite technology and the inherited wisdom of their elders, who can read the subtle signs of ecosystem change that data might miss. They are fighting not just to protect resources, but to uphold a relational universe where the forest, the sea, and the people are one interconnected being. How do you care for a world you believe is alive? You listen to it, you speak for it, and you defend it as you would your own family. From the misty shores of Haida Gwaii to the halls of global power, the epic saga of the Haida people stands as a testament to an unbreakable spirit. We have journeyed through their world, from master mariners whose cedar canoes ruled the Pacific, to the unparalleled artists who carved their soul into towering poles of cedar and stone. They were a society of profound complexity, governed by the balance of eagle and raven, and sustained by the sacred reciprocity of the potlatch. They faced near total annihilation from disease and a systematic assault on their culture, yet they never vanished. They became guardians of their own flame, preserving their language and laws in the quiet spaces, waiting for the dawn of their renaissance. Today, they are not a relic of history, but a living nation, reclaiming their sovereignty and leading the way in protecting the land they have always known as a relative. Their story is a powerful reminder that a civilization's strength is not measured by its monuments, but by its capacity to endure, to remember, and to rise again. This living history is not confined to museums. It breathes in the forests of Guayhanas and speaks through the voices of a new generation. The journey does not end here. You can be a part of this ongoing story. Seek out the work of Haida artists and storytellers. Listen to their voices. Learn the true history of the land you call home. Support the rights of indigenous peoples everywhere to protect their cultures and their territories. The legacy of the Haida, Canada's Indigenous Vikings, is a gift to the world, a brilliant example of what it means to live with courage, to create with beauty, and to remain forever unbreakable.